another minute here to let folks jump on and just checking, can everyone see the presentation and hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. All right, I think we'll get started. It's 9 o'clock and there might be a few people who keep jumping on here. Thanks everybody for coming. My name is Nick Nisler. I'm one of the MS4 staff at the PCA out of the Duluth office. And today I'm going to be presenting on minimum control measure 4, which is the construction site stormwater runoff control. So some housekeeping items. Please stay muted and your video off. And then during the Q&A, you can enter questions all through the presentation, and we'll get to those during the Q&A session. Or feel free to enter your questions in the chat during the Q&A. Or also, if you'd like to speak, you can use the raise hand feature. And those controls are at the top right of the screen. We'll be putting web links to guidance in the chat, and we recommend saving those links right away because when the session ends, the chat will be gone. And a lot of those guidance links might be throughout the presentation, and for sure I'll put a bunch in at the end when we get to Q&A. An overview of today is we want these sessions to fit your needs. So if you have questions or think of resources that would benefit you to help fulfill permit requirements, please let us know. And this session can be a conversation. So please ask all the questions you have. And this session is intended to clarify expectations and what is required from the permit. And if you have questions for future sessions, please submit those to the MS4 permitprogram.pca@state.mn.us. Some MS4 program updates is the 2021 annual report is now open and can be submitted. The 2021 annual report is due by June 30th, 2022. And if you have questions about the current annual report, please contact your PCA staff. The annual report for this year for 2021 will be focused on the 2013 permit, and that's because permittees were covered under that permit the majority of the reporting year. And so the current 2021 annual report will look familiar from last year. And we're working with IT staff to create an e-service for the 2022 annual report that will be due in 2023. So for this year, it's going to look a lot of the same. You'll submit it the same as last year. And then next year, we're hoping to have an e-service for you. The next session topic is on April 21st, and that'll be on minimum control measure 1, public education and outreach, and also on MCM 2, public participation and involvement. We'll be doing a Mentimeter survey shortly here, and then we'll go through the MCM 4 requirements and guidance. We'll have a Q&A, and then we'll wrap up with another Mentimeter survey. So with that, I will turn it over to Carly for the Mentimeter survey.
Great, thanks, Nick. Great, thanks, Nick. Am I off mute now?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I just posted the link to the Mentimeter survey in the chat. I'm going to share my screen here so we can see the results as they come in. If you click on that link in the chat, it'll bring you to this first question here. Looks like people are finding it, so that's great. The first question we have this morning is, what organization are you representing today? For those of you that have joined in the past, the Mentimeter survey is anonymous, so don't feel like you need to answer one way or another. This just gives us a good idea of who's joining today and what kind of things we should maybe look to create in the future. All right, I'll give it a few more seconds here. Looks like everyone's finding it, which is great. Move on to the second question here. How long have you been working with the MS4 permit? All right, awesome. Looks like we have people with all different experience working with the MS4 permit. Our third question this morning is, what is the status of your construction site stormwater runoff control regulatory mechanism or mechanisms to meet the 2020 MS4 permit requirements? Again, this is just a gauge where everybody's at. And I'm sure Nick will touch on it, but we are coming out with a model ordinance. All right, well, that's awesome. Looks like a majority of you already have a satisfactory regulatory mechanism in place, so that's great. So the next question I have this morning is, what frequency do you conduct site inspections for high priority sites? All right, it looks like majority of you are conducting inspections in high priority areas once a week. This next question is similar to the last one. What frequency do you conduct site inspections for low priority sites? All right, looks like we got people kind of all over the board on this one. I have one last question for you this morning. My local leaders support holding contractors and developers accountable for effective erosion and sediment control on construction sites or on construction projects. All right, and I think that wraps up my questions this morning. So I'm going to turn it back over to Nick. Thank you everyone for taking some time to respond.
Thanks, Carly. Can you see my presentation again?
Yes.
All right, so getting started with minimum control measure 4, construction site stormwater runoff control. MCM4 is all about developing, implementing, and enforcing a program that addresses construction activity with a land disturbance of greater than or equal to 1 acre, including projects that are less than 1 acre that are part of a larger common plan of development or sale. And to talk more about the larger common plan of development or sale, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Green, our statewide compliance coordinator.
Morning, everybody. Again, like Nick said, my name is Brian Green. I'm the compliance coordinator for the MS4 program and the construction stormwater program here at the PCA. And so I've got just a couple slides to chat about common plan of development and, what is it and how does it fit into the MS4 program in more of a general sense. Nick will cover the specific permit requirements as he goes through his presentation. But, as you can see, on the slide, subdivision or common plan of development it's a subdivision, a phased project, or a combination of construction activities where multiple contiguous separate land disturbing activities may happen on different schedules, but under one proposed plan. I mean, that's a mouthful, but in all reality, some of the probably the main projects that you guys would be dealing with would be residential subdivisions, maybe a commercial subdivision, where there's an overall plan that addresses the roads, the infrastructure, and then they sell off the individual lots for development. And so why are we highlighting this today? It's not a new requirement. This language was in the 2013 permit. It's in the construction stormwater permit. But over the last few years, or quite a few years in the construction stormwater program, we've been seeing significant non-compliance on these individual lots when they're being developed. And, throughout MS4s, throughout non-MS4 cities, out in the counties, where they're putting up subdivisions outside city limits. And it's, non-compliance with permitting requirements. It's non-compliance with even having a permit. And we're trying to figure out why that is. And so, we've had for over the last 3 years, the construction stormwater program has had a sub team in the winter trying to deal with this. We know there's probably a lack of education to builders, mainly the small builders, but we do see that sometimes our worst offenders are these larger builders that actually should know better. We've had 3 years of educational efforts to reaching out to builders associations. 1 year I put out an email that had that explained common plan of development, what the requirements were, all the links that we could think of that would be beneficial, and we sent it to every city in the state of Minnesota. We've created news articles that are in, that we put into builders associations, magazines, other articles that go out from the PCA. We've created some tear-off sheets, some pamphlets. We're trying to do everything we can to get the word out. We're working with, I believe right now, our team is working with the U of M on some possible training for these smaller sites as well. When we go out and do our construction stormwater inspections, we're using kind of a low-level enforcement action to try to educate these builders. The developers we hold to a higher standard, they should know better. But the individual lot owners, we've been using low-level enforcement actions when they don't have permit coverage and following the permit requirements. And in our program, normally that would result in enforcement with penalties, but we're trying to educate. And then we're also trying, we're keeping track of those that we've issued these LOWs to, so that if we come across them again, it'll be a different story. But definitely something that we're trying to address. Next slide. And so here's just kind of a quick animation that, kind of walks through the processes of a subdivision. The developer has got this 25 lot subdivision. They do the mass grading of the property or the site. They put in the road infrastructure and the pond, and then they start selling off the lot. So in this scenario, they sell 9 lots to ABC Homes, they sell one lot to an individual homeowner who's going to build their own home, and then the other 15 go to another property or another builder. So this is just an example of one, and what that means is that, you know, the mass or the main developer would have permit coverage. They'll transfer that coverage to the individual builders, and then they need to follow all the construction stormwater permit requirements as well for erosion sediment control. And then, you know, that doesn't let obviously once the developer sells off all the lots, it doesn't mean they're off the hook. They should still be responsible for the road and the pond, the stormwater management system infrastructure, unless there's been some agreement, you know, to transfer that to a new owner. So what's this mean for the MS4 program? You know, so if you have a common plan that's over 1 acre, it's in size, and it means that the mass grading, if some was done, any construction of the overall infrastructure, roads and stormwater management system or systems, and the development of the individual lots, many of which are less than 1 acre, are regulated under the MS4 permit and must comply with your regulatory mechanisms, site plan review and inspection processes, and any other procedures that you are required to have under the MS4 permit. And like I said, Dick will, as he goes through his presentation with the individual item numbers, permit items, he'll talk about when there's common plan of development language that applies to those. So again, just to reiterate, this is not a new requirement, but I think it is an area that is lacking in education and oversight throughout the state, not just in MS4s. And as I stated earlier, we are taking, you know, this seriously and trying everything we can think of to take a proactive educational and low-level enforcement approach before considering ratcheting it up to enforcement that includes penalties. So if you have any ideas, obviously, of how to help that or how we can help you achieve compliance within your jurisdictions, you know, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. One last thing to leave you with, and Nick, if you can put the link in the chat, is our subdivision team this winter put together a YouTube video, and very similar to the animation that we walked through, but it's got quite a bit more in there related to common plan development and permitting requirements and the processes that folks go through when they buy the properties. It was developed by Josh Norman and McKenna Rodine of our CSW program. But I definitely think it's a tool that MS4s could provide to their developers to help educate them as to the requirements for permitting. It would meet the requirement of you notifying those that need a construction stormwater permit, because it does talk about the need to get that permit. And then it's also, I think, highly recommended for MS4s to watch, especially if you're an MS4 that owns land, whether they owned it to start, got it through tax forfeiture, or whatever the case may be, and you're selling those lots off for development. We have come across a handful of cities that have gotten this land through whatever process, it's been platted, and now they're selling off the lots for development. And so in that case, the owner has, at the MS4 or the city, has the obligation to make sure that they transfer permit coverage and all of that kind of good stuff as well. So definitely something I think that would be beneficial for folks to watch. That's all I got. So Nick, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Brian. So what are the MS4 permit requirements for MCM4? The main components of it is that you need to have a regulatory mechanism, site plan review procedures, site inspection procedures, procedures for reports of noncompliance, need to conduct staff training, need to have an enforcement response procedures. There's documentation of those items, and also to conduct an annual assessment. And as we move through the requirements, any text in red in the slides is a new requirement or where additional specificity was included from the 2013 MS4 permit. And Please note that those new permit requirements must be implemented within 12 months from when the permittee received permit coverage under the new 2020 MS4 permit. So starting off with permit item 19.3 is the requirement to develop, implement, and enforce a regulatory mechanism. To the extent allowable under state or local law, the permittee must develop, implement, and enforce a regulatory mechanism that establishes requirements for erosion, sediment, and waste controls that is at least as stringent as the most current MPCA construction stormwater general permit. A regulatory mechanism may consist of contract language, an ordinance, permits, standards, written policies, operational plans, legal agreements, or any other mechanism that will be enforced by the permittee. And the key piece here is that your mechanism is enforceable. You must have the legal authority to compel compliance if someone were to violate your regulatory mechanism. Permit item 19.4 is to update your regulatory mechanism whenever there is a new construction stormwater permit that is issued. And this is a new permit requirement. The text is red here again for anything that's new. So when a CSW permit is reissued, the permittee must revise their regulatory mechanism if necessary within 12 months of the issuance date of that permit to be at least as stringent as the requirements for erosion, sediment, and waste controls described in that new construction stormwater permit. 19.5 is the regulatory mechanism requirements. So what needs to be in that? You must require that owners and operators of construction activity develop site plans that must be submitted to the permittee for review and confirmation that the regulatory mechanism requirements have been met prior to the start of construction activity. You must require that the owners and operators of construction keep the site plans up to date with regard to their stormwater runoff controls. And you must require that the site plans incorporate the following erosion, sediment, and waste controls that are again at least as stringent as described in the construction stormwater permit. And those include erosion prevention practices, sediment control practices, dewatering and basin draining, inspection and maintenance, pollution prevention management measures, temporary sediment basins, and termination conditions. So under the common plan of development, ensure that permittees are reviewing site plans for those individual lots less than an acre, but part of a larger common plan of development. It is also recommended your regulatory mechanism incorporate the MPCA construction stormwater general permit requirements for erosion, sediment, and waste control by reference. That can make it easier so you don't have to update each individual requirement for erosion, sediment, and waste controls when a new CSW permit is reissued, going back to that requirement that you have to update within 12 months when there are new CSW permit requirements issued. And then also for PCA compliance evaluations, incorporating the CSW permit by reference can be an easier way to comply with the regulatory mechanism requirements of the MS4 permit. And incorporating by reference means that you will be implementing and enforcing those requirements. Permit item 19.6 is the site plan review procedures. The permittee must implement written procedures for site plan reviews conducted by the permittee prior to the start of all construction activity to ensure compliance with requirements of your regulatory mechanism. And at a minimum, the procedures must include written notification to owners and operators proposing construction activity, including projects less than an acre that are part of a larger common plan of development or sale, of the need to apply for and obtain coverage under the CSW permit, and use of a written checklist consistent with the requirements of the regulatory mechanism to document the adequacy of each site plan required. So ensure you're notifying the owners and operators also for those individual lots that are under an acre and part of a larger common plan of development for the need to apply for and obtain coverage under the CSW permit. The MPCA developed a notice that parties can use if a project is disturbing 1 or more acres or less than an acre, but part of a larger common plan, to obtain the MPCA CSW permit before construction begins. And so that's that notice in the red box there. And so here's an example of a written notification to owners and operators proposing construction activity of the need to apply for and obtain coverage under the CSW permit. And in this example, on a local land disturbance permit application, where the applicant would sign and date the application, the city added that permit notice. So what's in the box there, and we'll see it again here in a bit. What's in the box is these sticky tear-off sheets, like a notepad, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. The PCA Construction Stormwater Program also has a brochure that covers common plan of development, protecting receiving waters, and a notice to obtain permit coverage. And then on the back of that brochure is 10 steps to stormwater pollution prevention on construction sites. And we'll see that graphic later of the 10 steps. And so for the permit notice, again, we have a hard copy tear-off sheets, and that's in that little red box. So it's like a sticky notepad. They're smaller, like 3 by 4 inches. And we also have a PDF of that. And so you could use that sticky tear-off sheet on like a hard copy application or other items that you might hand out. So if you're interested in either the PDF or getting like a booklet of those sticky tear-off sheets, please contact your CSW inspector or your MS4 contact if you would like some of those permit notice sticky tear-off sheets or a PDF of that. And I will put a link later to the map of our CSW inspector staff. Permit item 19.7 is your site inspection procedures. The permittee must implement an inspection program that includes written procedures for conducting site inspections to determine compliance with the permittee's regulatory mechanisms. The inspection program must also meet the next 2 permit requirements we'll talk about, 19.8 and 19.9. So 19.8 is your high and low priority site inspection procedures. The permittee must maintain written procedures for identifying high priority and low priority sites for inspection. At a minimum, those written procedures must include a detailed explanation describing how sites will be categorized as either high priority or low priority, a frequency at which you will conduct inspections for high priority sites, and also a frequency for which you'll conduct inspections for low priority sites. And then also part of those procedures have the name of individuals or position titles responsible for conducting those site inspections. So when you're categorizing site inspections as either high or low priority, some examples of that could be site size, proximity to water bodies or special waters like trout streams, steep slopes, soil type, and other characteristics like that. Those are just some examples of how you can categorize if it's going to be high or low priority. And so you're not required to inspect every site, but that's great if you can. Low priority site inspection frequency can be less frequent, or for an example, at times it could be complaint based. And high priority site inspections can be any frequency you choose, but conducting site inspections should be to the maximum extent practicable, should be taken into consideration. And so another note is a frequency of at an as needed basis doesn't meet the requirement. You do need to have a specific frequency identified. And also ensure that those individual lots less than an acre, but part of a larger common plan of development, are being considered when determining procedures to categorize as either high or low priority. Permit item 19.9 is your site inspection checklist documentation. The permittee must implement a written checklist to document each site inspection when determining compliance. At a minimum, the checklist, and this is all a new requirement, and so at a minimum now, your checklist must include the permittee's inspection findings on the following areas. And so all these items at a minimum should be on your checklist, and that's stabilizing exposed soils, stabilizing ditch and swale bottoms, sediment control BMPs on all down gradient perimeters, storm drain inlet protection, energy dissipation at pipe outlets, vehicle tracking BMPs, preserving a 50-foot natural buffer or redundant sediment control when you're within 50 feet of a surface water. Owner and operator of construction activity are doing their weekly and rainfall inspections and keeping those records. Containment for all liquid and solid waste generated by washout operations like concrete washout, and all BMPs are being maintained and functional. So for MS4 owned projects, you are required to do CSW weekly and rainfall inspections and MS4 inspections. The CSW weekly and rainfall site inspections don't count as your MS4 required inspections. And so look at it that the CSW site inspections identify what needs to be installed or maintained, and keeping an eye on your site once every 7 days and after a half-inch of rain. And then the MS4 needs to do separate inspections to determine compliance and provide regulatory oversight of the contractor. And again, that frequency of your MS4 inspections is going to be determined by you based on high and low priority sites. And then the written checklist is still required when a site is determined to be in compliance. So you still need to document that inspection, even if everything looks good. This is the top 5 construction stormwater permit violations that the MPCA construction stormwater program has identified in the past. And so these would be like the top 5 things that you would look for when doing site inspections. Of course, you're looking for everything on that checklist at a minimum, but these are the top 5 things that inspectors have seen in the field. And that is missing or inadequate soil stabilization, missing perimeter control, missing or inadequate inlet protection, vehicle tracking, and the BMPs are not being maintained. Permit item 19.10 is the procedures for following up on complaints. The permittee must implement written procedures for receipt and consideration of reports of noncompliance for or other stormwater related information on construction activity submitted by the public to the permittee. So having a procedure of when you do get a complaint by the public, how will you be following up on that? 19.11 is about training staff for site plan reviews, site inspections, and enforcement. You must ensure that the individuals receive training commensurate with their responsibilities as they relate to your construction site stormwater runoff control program. And those individuals include, but it's not limited to, the individuals responsible for conducting site plan reviews, site inspections, and or enforcement. But ultimately, everyone needs to have some form of training as it's commensurate with their responsibilities of MCM4. And the permittee must ensure that previously trained individuals attend a refresher training every 3 calendar years following the initial training. So that's just as things, there's new things that come out, and so just keeping staff refreshed on their training. 19.12 is the enforcement response procedures. You must maintain a written enforcement response procedure, or ERP, to compel compliance with the permittee's regulatory mechanism. And at a minimum, the written ERPs must include a description of enforcement tools available to the permittee and guidelines for the use of each tool, and the name or position title of the responsible persons for conducting enforcement. 1913 is documentation. For each site plan review conducted by the permittee, you must document the following, and that's project name, location, total acreage to be disturbed, owner and operator of the construction activity, proof of notification to obtain coverage under the CSW permit, or proof that coverage under the CSW, or actual proof of coverage under the CSW permit, and any stormwater related comments and supporting completed checklist as required in 19.6 used by the permittee to determine project approval or denial. 1914 is another documentation requirement for each training in item 1911, which again is training for site plan reviews, site inspections, and enforcement. You must document the general subject matter covered, names and departments of individuals in attendance of that training, and the date of that training event. 1915 is you must document any enforcement conducted pursuant to your ERPs, and that's including verbal warnings. And so at a minimum, the permittee must document the following, and that's the name of the person responsible for violating the terms and conditions of your regulatory mechanism, date and location of the observed violations, description of the violations, and then the corrective actions, including a completion schedule issued by the permittee. If there are any referrals to other regulatory organizations, and then the date the violations were resolved. 19.16 is the annual assessment. You must conduct an annual assessment of your construction site stormwater runoff control program to evaluate program compliance, the status of achieving measurable requirements, and determine how the program might be improved. And so measurable requirements are activities that must be documented or tracked as applicable to your MCM. And those are things like your inventory, trainings, site plan reviews, inspections, enforcement, and other items. So you must perform the annual assessment prior to completion of each annual report and document any modifications made to the program as a result of your annual assessment. So look at it as you're going to identify any modifications in your annual report, like maybe you updated an ordinance or a regulatory mechanism. And so the whole idea of the annual assessment is to review how your local stormwater program can be more effective, efficient, and improve. And that's going to conclude the permit requirements. And now I'm going to talk about some guidance that the PCA has for permittees. We have in the Minnesota Stormwater Manual, and I'll have links to all these guidance pages here at the end. In the Minnesota Stormwater Manual, we have the MS4 Digital Document Library, or DDL. And this is a space for stormwater program staff to store and circulate example documents that are being used to manage stormwater programs. So in the DDL, you'll find examples of checklists, procedures, templates, and a lot more. And please note that the stormwater manual and many of its pages continue to be updated for current information and compliance with the new MS4 permit. We also have in the stormwater manual the MS4 toolkit, and the toolkit offers a wide range of stormwater education information, including sample fact sheets, newsletters, videos, which are mainly through YouTube, photos, and much more. And you can use any of the material you like for your program. That's what this all is designed for, is you go to the toolkit and these other manual pages, and you can take it and make it your own and use it for your educational purposes and trainings. So we are, again, like Carly mentioned earlier, we're working on a model ordinance for MCM4. which will be one location it'll be is in the toolkit here. And we'll also send out a Gov delivery letting you know when it's available. Also, on the MPCA Construction Stormwater webpage, on the right-hand side, they have a link to a guidance page, and there is just lots of really great construction stormwater guidance in there. So there's guidance on compliance, best management practices, other top specific guidance, just a lot of great fact sheets and guidance documents there on their website for construction activity. And an example of one of those guidance items is this 10 steps to stormwater pollution prevention on small residential construction sites. This is just a great example of all the good stuff they have on their guidance page. I really like this one because it's a cool infographic that talks about 10 construction stormwater requirements, and it's great as a tool like when you're doing inspections, just as a refresher, and also a great handout for contractors. Hand this out to folks, and it's just a good reminder for them that they can keep on hand to stay in compliance. On the MS4 webpage, on the right-hand side, we have the 2020 MS4 general permit link. And when you click on that, there will be a highlighted version of the MS4 permit that highlights the new requirements or where additional specificity was included from the 2013 permit. I really like that highlighted version because it's a nice reference for all the new things that you need to get into compliance with within the 12 months from when you were issued permit coverage. So that's just a really convenient way to be able to see what's new or more specific. I want to thank you all for coming, and please contact us anytime with questions. We're here to help you be successful in running a local stormwater program and meeting the permit requirements. And if you're needing any contact information, your PCA contact can be found at the bottom of the MPCA MS4 website down at the bottom of the page. So you just click on that link and it'll bring you to the manual that will list all of our MS4 permittees along with their contact. And with that, we will go into the Q&A, and I will post some links here in the chat.
So Nick, before I go to Q&A, if I can, I'll just give I'm always optimistic or hesitant to give updates on the model ordinance because sometimes it's out of our control, but I'm hoping something real soon. I'm finalizing things with our publications team for, formatting requirements of any documents that we put out there. But so cross our fingers, within a week or two, or hopefully even less, but just wanted to give folks that update.
Thanks, Brian. So looking in the chat here, there's a question from Patrick. Does a reference to the CSW permit in city ordinance meet the intent of 19.4? And Dwayne answered, absolutely. Thanks, Dwayne. And it looks like Josh Norman, one of the CSW inspectors, looks like this is an update on what are the new top 5 violations for the 2021 construction season. Thank you, Josh. And that is failure to conduct inspections. So they're not seeing that the contractors and owners are conducting their weekly and rainfall inspections. Failure to provide down gradient sediment control BMPs. Failure to stabilize soils in 7 or 14 days, 7 days being if you're near those special or impaired waters, and failure to provide redundant sediment control BMPs within 50 feet of the surface water. Yeah, so now we'll just open it up to anyone that has questions. You can either go go off mute or raise your hand in the chat, or put your question in the chat. We have lots of time for any questions that people have.
And don't be shy. We're here for you. We love questions.
Question came in from Noah. I'm curious, on average, about how many CSW permit inspections do MPCA inspectors complete annually, and about what % are within an MS4?
I can take that one, Nick. So we have our annual commitment to the EPA and it's 10% of our universe. So it depends on how many permits are issued annually. So it can range anywhere from 3 to 400 plus. It changes each year depending on what's going on out in the world. And as far as percent in MS4s, we've made the determination to try to allow you guys to do your implement your programs and address the sites within the MS4. Now, there are MS4 owned projects, so we do try to get to inspections of those projects. And that's really where we've been putting our focus the last few years, because it's trying to get the best bang out of everything we've got. And so we hope that the MS4s are doing their inspections on these sites so we can focus in those areas outside of the MS4s. But yeah, we still will do those MS4 inspections or inspections inside MS4s. If there's a site that you're having a lot of trouble with, reach out to your inspector and we can see what we can do to accommodate that. But again, we're just trying to cover the largest area that we possibly can, so we get more compliance rather than focusing on the same sites.
Question from Amy. Will the MPCA continue to reach out to local MS4 staff when inspecting in MS4 areas?
I guess that kind of depends on, each inspector, on the, if it's a complaint, if it's an MS4 owned project. Again, we do emphasize to our inspectors to try to build those relationships with MS4 staff. And one way to do that is if we are inspecting sites, non-MS4 owned sites, in an MS4, is to reach out and say, hey, I'm going to be there tomorrow. If you'd like to attend and tag along, you can do that, because there is a lot of benefit in, like I say, building those relationships, making sure then that it allows the opportunity for the MS4 inspectors to see how we're implementing and interpreting the rules and regulations, and so that we can try to be on the same page, so that we're not telling the inspector or the contractor something different than the MS4. So that's a great question, Amy, and we always try to build those relationships. I just can't say for sure we will always do that. It's something that we try to focus on and like I say, do it as much as we can. But sometimes people just get busy too, or they're out doing an inspection, drive through a city, see something, so they stop in. It's just not something that can happen all the time.
Thank you, Brian. Question from Mike. Is the timeline for the new information, is that based off the permit issuance date or the permit coverage date? So to be in compliance with the new permit requirements, it's going to be need to be in compliance within 12 months from when each individual permittee got permit coverage under the new permit. So that date is going to be different for every permittee. It's not the date on the general permit. It's the date that you received your actual coverage. Question from Noah. Thanks for the answer. I appreciate your communications from MPCA inspectors when they're inspecting projects within the MS4. The communication with us from MPCA inspectors has been excellent. Thank you, Noah. And just a note back to Mike's question about when you have to be in compliance with the new permit requirements. If anyone is looking for that date again on when they receive permit coverage, just reach out to your MS4 contact if you just looking for a reminder when that date was. For most people, it's going to be around October, November for most permittees, but it'd be good to know that date exactly so everybody is in compliance by that time. And just another note, we also look at this as a great time as you're going through the new permit and looking at the new requirements to implement those into your program. It's also a great time to look at all the old requirements to make sure that all those old requirements are also being incorporated and in compliance with your program. So just a real good time to look through your whole program here over the coming months and make sure everything's in good shape. Any more questions? Keep them coming. Question from Tyler. Question on common plan of development. What is the original permit? What if the original permit has already been closed? We have developments that take 15 plus years to fully build out. Great question, Tyler.
Yeah, it is. And I'll kind of tell you what we've been doing with this, Tyler, and obviously permitting is a PCA requirement. So this is definitely, when you run into a scenario like this, please reach out to your CSW inspector, PCA CSW inspector, and we'll do what we can to help you through this or help. But I guess it's really going to fall back on us to make sure that we get either that original permit reopened, or we determine who's the majority owner of the lots that are left, and they may have to get a permit. But we'll work through the process here at the PCA to make sure that there's a parent permit that gets reopened if possible, because that's the best option, because it allows then those individual lot owners to get permit coverage without paying $400 and putting a bunch of money into a SWIP. And so, I mean, there's a lot of details there that there's benefit to there being a parent permit. So yeah, the answer is if you do run into a site that there is no, or the original development is no longer covered, business went out of bit, the company or the developer went out of business, let us know. We've worked through many of these scenarios. We've, a lot of times the banks take over through forfeiture, the lots, and so we've made the banks get the permits. So we've got some avenues we've addressed that in the past.
Another question here from Mike. Is there a sample ordinance by reference to comply with 19.5? I don't believe so. I'd have to double check on that.
Remind us, what's 19.5?
Yeah, 19.5 is the regulatory mechanism for owners and operators to develop site plans that must be submitted for review and confirmation that the regulatory mechanism have been met.
Does our model ordinance that we're hoping to release soon address that?
A little confused on, Mike, did you mean, what's the requirement for the updating the regulatory mechanism where it needs to meet the new requirements?
I can zoom to it in the presentation so everybody can see it. Here is permit 19.5. Off the top of my head, unless that's going to be something under our new model ordinance, part of that, at the moment, we don't have like a sample of that.
I have a copy. This is Cole Angraff, MPCA permit writer. I do have a copy, Brian, of the draft model ordinance, and I do see that 19.5 is incorporated in that. So that'll be a resource to check that out.
Is that available currently?
Nope, not yet. Like Brian said earlier, I think in the next 2 weeks we're open to make that available.
I'm hoping within days. I mean, like I say, I'm just finalizing stuff with our publications folks, but like I said, it's not kind of out of my hands now, so I can't dictate how fast they get to stuff, but talked with them yesterday. They planned on reaching out to me this afternoon. It's just a couple small tweaks, so we're close. So hopefully have something soon. I guess I was just kind of trying to think about language that's in there. I know some of in the model ordinance language, it says, incorporate CSW by reference as amended from time to time, which, is language in there that just says, anytime the CSW permit's updated, that your regulatory mechanism would be updated. But I don't know if that's exactly what Mike was looking for.
So if my community here adopts this MPCA's MPDS permit by reference, does that comply with 19.5? I guess I'm not clear exactly what our ordinance needs to say or what state rule our ordinance needs to reference to comply with 19.5.
So I would say if you adopt the model ordinance language, they're gonna be required to create site plans or SWIPs, stormwater pollution prevention plans, which are very probably what most people submit for site plans anyway. But this 19.5 is a little bit more descriptive on the MS4 side. So the CSW permit would require them to develop a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which you might consider complete for your site plans. I don't know what you're going to have in your ordinance for everything you want to see in a site plan. But this 19.5 is saying that you're then having in your regulatory mechanism, it's going to say you must submit this. So so it gets a little more specific. If you look at the model ordinance that we're going to put out there, if you were to adopt the model ordinance as written, it would meet this requirement. We made sure we tried to write the regulatory mechanism to meet all the requirements. If you would just adopt the construction stormwater permit by reference, then you might have to tweak your regulatory mechanism to include some of these more specific requirements of what you want to see in a site plan, or that they must submit it prior to construction activity. You might just have to tweak it a little bit, your regulatory mechanism a little bit to meet the requirements, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, thanks. That clears it up a little bit. You mentioned that there was going to be a sample model ordinance coming out. I guess I want to be able to find that as soon as it comes out. Will that be I have trouble finding stuff on your web pages. There's a vast amount of information there, but I would be highly interested in this model ordinance that you referenced, maybe coming out soon.
Right. So Nick did mention about a gov delivery that would be sent out, but I'm sure, I don't know, Mike, which MS4 are you in?
White Bear Township.
Okay. So whichever one of our MS4 contacts has that, I mean, we can work with you to send that document to you as well when it's available. And it's So the document itself is the first page or so of it is more the direction pages, walks through the regulatory or the ordinance, model ordinance. There's some italicized language in there. There's highlighted language. It talks about what that means. It gives you options of you can adopt the construction stormwater permit by reference in its entirety. You can adopt or incorporate by reference parts, the erosion and sediment control and waste control requirements of the construction stormwater permit, or you can use the model ordinance. And then it's got some additional language in there, but it also then explains that something you got to think about if you do adopt the construction stormwater permit by reference, the entire permit is you're adopting everything then. So it goes beyond the requirements of the MS4 permit as to what you must have in a regulatory mechanisms. And that's in that direction page as well. Just wanted folks to think about those things when you adopt language by reference. So Mike, we'll do our best to get, as soon as it's available, we'll try to get that to you.
Yeah, and Mike, for White Bear Township, the MPCA MS4 contact again is Jeremy Sinoski. So yeah, just you can reach out to any of us, but for sure, Jeremy, anytime you have questions, and we can keep you updated on that.
And Mike, just in case you haven't seen it, Amy Riegel points out that she has some materials that she has to offer in the chat there. And so she does a pretty good job out there, so she could probably help you out.
Thanks, Mike. The great question.
And I just want to throw this out there too. I know we've said it before too. I mean, but as you guys are working through your regulatory mechanisms, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us, and we'll try to make sure that, or we'll do our best. Obviously, it all depends on workloads to review and help make sure we can answer any questions that you might have, so that so we set you up in moving forward in the right direction, rather than wait to get to an audit and find out that your regulatory mechanism doesn't meet the the requirements. I mean, that isn't good for anyone.
Any more questions out there? I'm gonna say no questions too small, so.
Maybe while we wait for other questions to come in, should we do the Mentimeter survey?
Yeah.
All right, so everybody, I'm going to post the link in the chat again. I'm just going to be doing a wrap up kind of today's session. So the link for the Mentimeter survey is in the chat. You can click on that and it'll bring you to this question here. What guidance or materials would you suggest be developed and made available by the MPCA related to today's topic? And we've already had some good discussion, but this kind of just helps us moving forward. Anything else we should look to develop to help meet permit requirements? All right, well, thanks for the feedback. I think I'm going to move on to the next question just to be kind of cognizant of time. If you have any other things you want to add, feel free to continue adding them. How helpful was the information provided in this outreach session? Right, I think I'm going to wrap it up here in a few seconds. Looks like everyone kind of learned a couple new things, so that's always good. So the last question we have today for you, how can the MPCA improve future outreach sessions? It's great to hear that you feel these sessions have been helpful. That was been our intent, so that's really great to hear. Thank you for the feedback. If there's anything else you want to let us know, just feel free to keep posting it, but I'm going to turn it back over to Nick in case there's any last questions. But thank you for taking the time to answer these last few questions.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and thanks Carly. So Cole, our permit writer, had a note here. If you have been receiving email notices for these outreach sessions, you should also receive a Gov delivery email about the model ordinance once it's available, and we send that out. If you are not currently receiving email notices from Gov delivery, please let us know. You would like to sign up by emailing ms4 permitprogram.pca@state.mn.us. Yeah, highly recommend that. That'll keep you in the loop on all the good stuff and updates we have. Mark had a note here. He said, asked if there was a way to access today's session via the recording. Yeah, Mark, what we'll do here in the next day or so, we will have the recording as a YouTube, and we'll have that on our trainings and webinars page in the stormwater manual. And yeah, thanks, Cole. Looks like we have a link down below. Cole posted the link to the manual where you can find all the past recordings for today and all the ones we've done prior to this. And then also there's the calendar for all the upcoming sessions. The times and are in there, as well as the agendas in the future will be posted as well. Thanks, Mike, for the comment. Have these training sessions more often. Question from Mike. Is the state plumbing code have any jurisdiction on stormwater installation, pipe bedding, etc.? That's going to be all separate than the state MS4 general permit.
Yeah, Mike, we're not really sure. Honestly, I don't know about the plumbing code and what it requires in terms of stormwater infrastructure installation. That's not in our area, and I wish I did know. And Jane is right. It might there may be some stormwater reuse material in the plumbing code. I know there's a lot of activity going on about stormwater reuse, and there may be some efforts to place things into code or change regulations related to stormwater reuse, but it has not happened yet.
Yeah, and I guess another note, Mike, is that the MS4 permit's all about water quality, and it doesn't relate to installation of the infrastructure and other code like that.
Nick, this is Scott Fox. Mike and I had a conversation the other day about this issue. The plumbing code has been amended to include rainwater, so collection of rainwater off a roof and where the water is going into the building. for use in like flushing toilets or other things like that. And as we progress on reuse concepts, there may be future modifications to the plumbing code. But by and large, the code addresses, the plumbing code addresses things that are happening inside the building, not outside. So unless there is some kind of reuse concept where stormwater is being brought into the building, they're two separate codes. And again, that could possibly change in the future, but right now that's where it stands.
Thank you, Scott.
Nick?
Yes.
So I just wanted to add one thing I saw when they were suggesting things that would be helpful, and one that caught my eye was updating fact sheets and more pictures, less words. And I totally agree that that is something that would be very beneficial. Just want folks to understand it's definitely something that the construction stormwater program knows needs to be done. And but we kind of, obviously during construction season, you guys are as, busier than normal as well. And so each winter, the construction stormwater program does get together in the fall to determine some things we can do over the winter time. And so it's definitely something that I'll bring up to the team next fall, but just wanted to let folks know if we don't do anything, it's not that we're ignoring you or think it's a bad idea, because it's definitely a great idea. We just have to fit it into when time allows, and then we have to prioritize what needs to be done each year. So, but it did catch my eye because I think it's a really good idea.
Yep. And I'll add to that the same with things that you'll find in the stormwater manual related to MS4 pages. That's always a continuing effort to add more to it, to update things, reorganize it and things like that. So always an effort to try to make more and better guidance for folks. Any other questions? Otherwise, anytime, please reach out to your MS4 contact if you have any questions at all. And that could be about when you're updating your local program with new requirements, or just questions on the intent of a requirement, anything at all. Please reach out to us anytime. We're here to help you be successful, and we want to make sure we have a great open communication and relationship there. So we're always here for you. So if you have any questions, even just after this session, please send them our way. So with that, I think PCA staff will probably hang on here for some few more minutes. Otherwise, everybody on the call, thank you all for coming, and thank you for your questions and your time today, and have a great rest of your day. And I think we can wrap it up here, PCA folks. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, Nick. We'll talk to you here in a little bit.
All right. Bye now.